The following KQED production was produced in high definition.
Closed captioning of this program is made possible by support from the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Presidential candidates are making regular visits to California. The local voter guides are in the mail. Are you ready for one of the most critical election cycles in years? With 3 statewide elections in 2008 and some local elections in the state in November, do people believe that their votes count, and are voting systems safe and secure? What will keep voters going to the polls? Tonight, a special on voting and voter confidence. That's coming up next. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Joining me tonight for a special discussion on voter confidence are Willie L. Brown, former mayor of San Francisco and former Speaker of the California Assembly; Henry Brady, professor of political science and public policy at UC Berkeley; Susan Clarke, founder of the Easy Voter Guide, a project of the California League of Women Voters; and Carla Marinucci, political reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle. In this era of hanging chads, miscounted votes, and missing paper trails, many have lost confidence in the electoral process. Who's voting and who isn't? How do campaigns reach voters? What are the unique challenges facing election officials and voters today? To begin, we take an in-depth look at the ongoing controversy over electronic voting machines with NewsHour correspondent Spencer Michaels.
Phones off, beepers off, vibrate only, please.
Florida 2000. A gigantic election snafu with hanging chads, ballots uncounted, and eventually the court-determined presidential victory of George W. Bush.
Gets to express your opinion about who the next president of the United States ought to be.
As an exercise in democracy, it was a nightmare. So in 2002, Congress passed the Help America Vote Act and appropriated $3.9 billion that was used mostly by counties across the country to buy with great speed new high-tech electronic voting machines, many of them the so-called touch screens that allow a voter to simply touch the candidate's name on the screen. But doubts about those machines have been percolating ever since. Computer experts like David Dill at Stanford have studied them and faulted them for lack of reliability.
I know that it's extremely hard to make systems bug-free. So there's a possibility of error in these machines and a possibility of deliberate tampering and no real way to detect it.
A lot of California voters don't seem to trust the current voting system, no matter what method they use to mark their ballot. A recent field poll indicates that less than half of those people have a great deal of confidence that their votes will be counted accurately, and 14% have little or no confidence. That's got a lot of people worried.
The public fight against electronic machines, especially touch screens, has been led by activists who claim the machines are an intrusion into the democratic process, a risk, they say, foisted upon election officials by large companies who are selling more than just products. Dan Ashby, co-founder of the Election Defense Alliance, calls it the outsourcing of our elections.
The election department, public servants, are not capable of running the election without having all kinds of technical help from the voting machine companies.
And the danger of that is?
Well, they have the access and the means, motive, and opportunity, if they were inclined, to change the programming in ways that no election official or voting member of the public could possibly perceive, such that it would change the outcome of the election in an undetectable, untraceable way.
But activists represent only a part of the public distrust of the machines. Mainstream politicians have taken up the cry.
Our scientists found that every system they looked at could be compromised in ways that made me uncomfortable.
Deborah Bowen is California's Secretary of State, elected in 2006 by promising to clean up a chaotic election system. She ordered some touchscreen machines decertified after she commissioned a top-to-bottom look at the devices by computer scientists.
They were able to bypass security seals by undoing 2 screws and opening the whole machine. They were able to change the results without having any knowledge of the computer code itself.
In 3 different computer systems, there are ways that a single poll worker or maybe a voter could actually take over the entire system and basically control every vote in the next election.
But some critics thought Bowen's top-to-bottom review was flawed and unrealistic. Steve Weir is Registrar of Voters in Contra Costa County and head of the state election officials organization.
It was a test that was conducted in a laboratory without any of the protections that we have on our systems. There's been no evidence that any vote's been changed on an electronic piece of equipment in California.
Besides, says Weir, the tests and publicity about theoretical vulnerabilities may have undermined the public's confidence in the system.
I think that it gave some credence in the eyes of people that have doubts about our systems in saying, aha, see, it can be done. But there's no proof that it has been done.
It's not possible to fix a problem unless people know what the problem is, and it's a necessary first step.
From 2000 until 2006, the use of electronic voting machines snowballed, but then it started to decline dramatically, and many recently purchased screens were taken out of service. Weir's Contra Costa County, and now most California counties and voters, use an optical scan machine, where a voter uses a pen to mark a ballot, which is scanned and counted electronically. Dill and Bowen also favor that system.
They are counted by a machine, but we have the ability to go back and hand count if the audits that we do indicate that there's any irregularity.
You specify.
The debate over the most reliable system is now being shaped not so much by political parties trying to gain advantage, as they did in 2000, but by computer scientists like Stanford's Dill, and that's a big change.
From the perspective of a lot of election officials or politicians, we're a new voice that hadn't been heard before, and so we were initially either ignored or basically mocked.
And that's changed, do you think?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're taken very seriously. So it seems that there's almost a national consensus that we have a serious problem.
But even optical scan and voter-verified paper trails and mandatory audits have not completely satisfied the skeptics.
My confidence has definitely increased, plus my optimism that over the long haul the system will be significantly improved has increased a great deal too.
But you're not completely confident in the system at this point.
No, I'm not. I don't think the system is perfect.
That distrust from scientists and the public can have big consequences, says Deborah Bowen.
My great concern is that it causes many people to check out and not participate, not vote.
Have you seen that actually happen?
Sure.
So this is a kind of a threat to democracy.
I think that it's a major threat to democracy. We need to be able to tell people that if you take the time to learn the issues and go vote, your voice will be heard, your vote will be counted.
Well, Spencer Michaels from the NewsHour. I could see while that video was playing, Professor, you're over sort of your head was going. How much of an issue do you think electronic voting machines are?
Well, I think it's been exaggerated, and I think people like Deborah Bowen have used it as a way to gain publicity and to gain political support for her positions. I think people like some of the computer scientists know a lot about computers. I don't know that they know that much about voting systems, about the procedures we have in place to actually protect your vote. So as a result, I think that we've exaggerated this problem, and I don't think it's having that much impact on turnout. It is affecting confidence. There's polls that show that people are not confident about the system, and there's no question about that. But maybe we should just stop for a minute and say, look, there's never been a perfect voting system. All the voter fraud in history, almost all of it, has been done with paper systems. So that these modern electronic systems have their problems, but you can't expect perfection.
So, Professor, what is it? I mean, do we still have a hangover from that 2000 election that the trust is just not there? I mean, we've got now a huge percentage of Californians are absentee voters. Are we actually safer being absentee voters? What's your recommendation?
Well, we do have a hangover, I think. I think people were really scared and frightened when they saw hanging chads and all the problems we had in Florida. Although what's interesting about Florida is it was about the accuracy or usability of machines, by which I mean whether or not those machines were actually recording people's votes. Now we're talking all about security, whether those machines could be somehow changed so that the vote totals could be changed. That's a different issue. And we really need to worry about both issues. Are the machines good enough to actually record people's votes? And at the same time, are they secure? And that brings us to absentee votes. The problem with absentee votes is people say, well, they got a paper trail, that's really great. Turns out, by the way, that every way you vote now in California has a paper trail, whether it's electronic or anything else. But absentee votes are a paper trail, but if you ever look at how they're processed in the local registrar's office, you might not be so thrilled. First, you got to compare a signature to make sure that person actually is the person.
That's not that same
yeah, and sometimes they go, well, that doesn't look like the right signature, and therefore they throw the vote out. And there's lots of other problems that can occur.
I've been watching body language. I see something coming from Mayor Brown over there in this discussion as a person who depended upon these votes being accurate.
Well, first and foremost, I don't think that there's any debate, Professor, about the question of confidence. Yes, voters have lost confidence in the accuracy of the system, but not any differently than confidence in any electronic process. We don't really have a lot of confidence in electronic systems taking care of whomever we are. You hear about identity fraud, you hear about all those things, and the voting process is absolutely no different than that. The drop-off in the indifference of voters, however, is primarily generated, in my opinion, by those of us who seek public office. We really don't go and try to get everybody to vote. I can assure you, I would like for people who have voted no on me to vote on a different day. I don't want them voting on the day that I'm, and believe me, I spend a lot of money to identify who will vote for Willie Brown. And the only people that I want on the polls on election day are people who will vote for Willie Brown on my issues or otherwise. And so I think it's wrong to mix the two. I don't think voter confidence is dissuading people from going to the polls in such great numbers that is causing the volume of voters to go down. I think it's those of us who seek public office that are doing the damage to the business of whether or not people are enthusiastic about voting.
Susan Clarke, we need to get you in on this because this is what your career has been spent around, making people feel good about going to the polls.
Well, it's true, and I think it's important that you put it in perspective. We do voter workshops and interviews up and down the state among those underrepresented populations, those people less likely to vote. And before 2000, they would say reasons not to vote, my vote won't make a difference, and so forth. But it was after 2000 we started to hear them to say, well, my vote might not be counted. So we hear it, but in fact, you dig a little deeper, it's still a very small factor relative to the other reasons why they're not turning out, which has to do with, is the issue, are the issues on the table relevant to them? Have the candidates connected to their issues? And do they feel confident about the voting process?
And Susan, isn't it also just voter fatigue? Look, since 2002, we've had to go back every year to the polls, this time 3 times by November. Every time we get a huge book of stuff we're supposed to be reading. It's like a final exam. In 2007, isn't there a way to make this easier for voters?
Well, let me tell you something. I think the government was wrong when they put all that money and made it available and left it to the discretion of the the election officials to determine what they spent the money for. That money never should have been spent for machinery. That money should have been spent the way the League of Women Voters have been operating for years on almost nothing. If that money had been spent for the purpose of enticing people to come vote, enticing people to participate, expanding the educational, objectively, opportunities for people to know about the whole process, that would have made a lot more sense than all this war over the machines.
You're talking about the $3.9 billion that was spent on the Help America Vote Act, which a lot of it went to electronic machines, and now we're throwing a lot of those away to get other machines. So maybe there might have been a better way to spend that money.
But wait, Mayor Brown, don't elected officials have some blame here, too, on another fact? We're going to the polls in February for the presidential primary, which everybody said was about making California more important. Wasn't it really about getting term limits out in front of the voters more than anything else? Don't the elected officials have a blame here?
I don't think it started with the motivation on term limits. I think it really was an effort to get California earlier in the process of selecting the nominees, particularly in the Democratic Party side of the aisle. This is a totally blue state. The number of delegates that are involved, you would have to win 10, 12 other states. If I won winner take all in California, I would be, I'd be a big gorilla in the mix of things. And so every state, by the way, is attempting to exploit the early voting process for nominee purposes because it means something financially. You don't spend, in California, somebody said the other day that that guy has $10 million. Well, let me tell you, I hope he's only running for mayor. I don't hope he's running statewide, because $10 million is nothing in the state of California. $10 million will buy the whole state of New Hampshire. So there's an incredible difference, and we are trying to make California count, and it was not just term limits.
Okay, Susan, tell us a bit about the number of elections coming up.
Well, in 2008, we're going to have 3 elections, and as you've mentioned already, we're going to have 2 primaries. And it's been mentioned in the past, California's primary used to be in June, and then it got moved up to March to make us more relevant, and then that didn't feel
only for presidential purposes.
Right, and then that didn't feel soon enough. So let's move it up to February, but leave the rest of the primary races for Congress and other offices in June. So now it's split in 2 pieces. This is really problematic because voters are very confused with primaries. The last presidential primary in March '04, we had an abysmal 30% turnout of eligible voters, a record low. We followed that rousing performance up with another record low in the gubernatorial primary of 23%. So we're not doing so good on primaries, and now we're going to split it in 2. You're going to have a mid-January voter registration deadline. That means all the groups and people who are working to get those new voters registered, it's going to be crummy timing, and you're not going to have all those down-the-ticket races creating campaign momentum. So I think it's very concerning.
I think June is the one that's going to suffer.
I think we're going the wrong way in these accelerated primaries. We really ought to be talking about probably moving June to maybe September, and then 60 days later having the runoff, which means the electoral process would not stop. You would not have the credible drop-off. You go from Arnold Schwarzenegger changed his fortune, electorally speaking, because he had so much more money than everybody else, that the day after the primary in June, he started his fall campaign. And for 35 to 40 days, he was not answered by anybody on television. He absolutely destroyed Phil Angelides, in that time period on an unanswered basis. And so if you really want to improve the participatory process, you really should shorten the amount of time that it actually happens and not do multiples. And believe me, I don't think there's any great value to Californians in the presidential process of constantly moving the primary from March now till February. What are we going to do? We're going to make it maybe in 2012 election. It's going to be Thanksgiving.
Okay, let's go to the elephant in the room. That's the voters who we're talking about. It's how to get them to move. So first, let's look at the population of our state. Who lives here? Who are the people that we're addressing? Who are the people who we're trying to get to register to vote and then to vote? So this is the way California's population looks today. 46% Caucasian, 32% Latino, remaining 22% Asians, 12%, African Americans, 6%, and then others. So that's the way the adult population look. But that is not the way the voter turnout is, or the way that the ethnic breakdown of the people who actually participate.
No, and this is the problem. You've got 28 million eligible voters here in the state, and 12 million are not registered. Increasingly, that picture that you just saw, this very diverse California picture, the voters tend to be white, 45 and over, affluent. They don't reflect.
We have some data on that.
Yeah.
Can we see that? That breaks down the voters by ethnic groups.
And that's really the issue when you're talking about, for instance, the Latino vote. Huge.
Yep.
We saw the population, the Latino population is huge, 36%. and yet only 14% of the voters.
And the Caucasian population at 46%, but 72% of the voters.
That changes, however, very dramatically based upon candidacies and based upon issues. For an example, in 1997, when there was on the ballot in San Francisco a measure to authorize $100 million for a stadium, I can assure you that with the Jack Daniels party that we held on Jack Davis's behalf, what have you, we created a real issue. But in the course of that election, the strategy that we employed caused a disproportionate increase in turnout among African Americans. They equaled what the citywide vote equaled the city, unprecedented. The same happens when it comes to candidacies like Antonio Villaraigosa in Los Angeles County, in Los Angeles City. In that mayoralty election, the numbers were not 14%, Carla, on the turnout side. The numbers were in the 40% on the turnout side. Right. So there are ways to change the breakdown of who votes.
Professor, what can be done, though, to get groups that are not voting at their representative numbers in the population, you think, to the polls? Is there anything that people who are involved, as you can do, or as Mayor Brown can do, to get these people to become interested in
Well, the mayor's talked about one of the most important things is get politicians who appeal to them and who will excite them and get them interested and get mobilization efforts that are formed around those politicians. Other things we can do, though, too, is to try to get better civics education in the schools and try to convince people that voting is not rocket science. I'm a PhD in political science. I don't read all the material I get. I probably shouldn't admit that, but I use very simple rules. Like I try to find out who's in favor of something, and then I say, well, I must be for or against that, depending upon where that person stands. So I find a few politicians I think I know and understand, and I look at what they tell me. And so it's not that hard to vote. But it is complicated for people because they face such long ballots, and we got to vote so frequently.
Which brings us to the long ballot explainer here.
Well, one of the projects of the League of Women Voters is the nonpartisan Easy Voter Guide. You know, that big official voter information booklet that you get, and it's over 100 pages, down into 16 easy-to-read pages. And so people talk about accessibility, but plain language, getting the legalese out. Busy voters report to us that it's like cramming for a test. They're scared that they have to answer every question. So this performance anxiety is actually as important an issue as making sure there's a candidate or an issue to motivate me. And new voters, especially as we want to change and get the electorate to be more representative of our state population, new voters tell us, never having been, what's going to happen to me at the polling place? And they think, well, maybe it'll be like going to the DMV. I'm going to have to stand in line. I'm going to have to pay something. You know, it's going to be a test. They're not going to treat me nice. And I'm going to be embarrassed or scared I'll do something wrong. So helping people understand that they have choices about how to do it, and they could vote at home because that may be less stressful for them, or they can get a family member to help them. It's very important for people to know that they can get that kind of help. And so the Easy Voter website helps them, the Smart Voter website helps them, and that's why we do those projects. And there's a network of thousands of organizations across the state trying to reach out and change that mix. But as you said, I think so correctly, is the HAVA money, you know, could have gone to that, because these nonprofit groups are valiantly, you know, competing against millions and millions of partisan dollars that are more designed to target that likely voter.
And many of the candidates are doing very, very good jobs.
That's what I wanted to ask you. We started talking about the number of elections. We have November here. We have the February. We have June, and then we finally get to November.
That's right.
So what is happening in terms of crunching?
We're seeing what Susan's group is doing is very important, but we're seeing the candidates also making great efforts. You know, Barack Obama, for instance, incredibly successful with young voters out there putting his stuff out on Facebook and MySpace, places where young voters are looking for information. That has to happen more and more. And as you mentioned, Susan, voters have to be aware, get out there on the internet, look for the information, Google, etc. I mean, it provides just way easier than it used to be.
The exciting new developments are those websites. But remember, you know, the majority of California voters are still getting their information from broadcast. It's about half, and only 17% from the internet. So, and that's.
And I think that will change. They're getting younger and a lot more internet adept. Even seniors are. And I mean, this is a whole new area for candidates. And we're really seeing it's making a difference to Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John Edwards, and on the Republican side as well. They are being very, very aggressive in reaching voters via email and every other way.
Mayor Brown, do you think it's going to matter that these candidates are going to have to campaign over the Christmas holidays because they will have very early primaries in January? How can they avoid it?
For a candidate, nothing is more frightening than to have to campaign between when you eat turkey and when you sing and toast the new year. No candidate in his right mind wishes to be competing with Walmart for Christmas, with Mattel for Christmas, with Barbie for Christmas, with Tickle Me Elmo for Christmas. They don't want to do that. And some of them are going to make the mistake of really trying to do it. I mean, you can't intrude upon traditional holiday activities. It's like trying to campaign at a bar mitzvah. Don't do it. That's not a good idea. As a matter of fact, don't even, distribute them literature. So yes, they're going to be in absolute panic.
Okay, so we have one round, and we've talked. Our purpose here was to encourage people to become involved. Professor, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think people are going to participate in all of these elections as they come forward?
Well, I think the turnout's going to be varied. I think the February election, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to come out because that's going to be exciting with a lot of the big names. I think the June is going to be problematic, and I think November will have a big turnout as well. Let me just say something about ballots. Everybody should check their ballot. They should make sure they voted correctly and accurately, because that's the first thing you can do and the most important thing you can do to make sure that the voting systems work for you.
Okay.
It's about issues, it's about candidates, as Mayor Brown said. If people feel connected to those, they will go out and vote.
Okay. Susan, what do you think?
I just want to make sure people know that they have access to nonpartisan tools, because they report that they don't feel like they have that information and it is available through the League and other partners.
So, Mayor Brown, what do you think? Do you think
there are a sufficient number of candidates now running, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side for the nomination? Every voter now has a personal choice. It's got a personal candidate. And if I know my colleagues seeking votes, they're only going to campaign to the people they identify as being supportive of them. If all of them concentrate in that way and not too many more drop out, the results could be a dramatic turnout in February. A dramatic turnout in February. However, come June, you're going to go back to what elected Dennis Herrera in San Francisco, which was a minority of a minority. What elected Chris Daley on the Board of Supervisors, a minority of the minority. And then come next November, as indicated, it will really depend upon who the nominees are. If it's Hillary Clinton versus Rudy Giuliani, that's rumble in the jungle. You're going to have a real operation going, and you're going to have a dramatic turnout.
All right. We have done our best to inform you as best we can, but our time is out now. We hope that this program will help you in making that trip to the polls. And before we go, remember that you can subscribe to our podcast by going to thisweek.kqed.org. We thank you for watching This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.